I remember when I first saw Alien, I was sitting in a projection room all by myself, and of course everything was much over length. I remember to this day the one scene where he was looking for his cat, and it was in this dark chamber and the ship, and I remember this chain hanging down, water dripping, and they hadn't cut it, and it went on, and I was absolutely terrified. Yeah, I kept saying, it's just a movie, it's just a movie, and it really scared the shit out of me, to be really honest. I mean, I was terribly frightened with it. And, which is good, because that helps when I have to sit down and write the music for it. In other words, I like to go see a film, any film that I'm doing, I try to see it first as an audience and react as the audience, and try to distance myself from what I eventually have to do.
Jerry Goldsmith's score is one of my favorite scores. Seriously threatening, but beautiful. And, I mean, it has beauty, darkness, and seems to play the DNA of some distant society, which you'd have to call it. You know, that space jockey would be from somewhere, and they would have some kind of order, social order or disorder.
I always think of space as being the great unknown, and not as terrifying, but questioning, and it's sort of an air of romance about it. And that's why I like doing Star Trek, because it's very romantic, and it paints space that way instead of all the weird things and all that. And I guess I approached Alien that way. There was this air of mystery, but there was sort of a beauty to it and the unknown. And I thought, well, let me play the whole opening very romantically and very lyrically, and then let the shock come as the story evolves. Not, in other words, don't give it away in the main title. So I wrote this very nice main title. There's sort of mystery, but it was lyrical mystery. It didn't go over too well, and really I had major disagreements over that. So then I subsequently wrote a new main title, which was the obvious thing, weird and strange, and which everybody loved, and I didn't love, and it was very interesting. Consequently, I kept getting kudos for years after on the main title I wrote for Alien, which was not exactly my choice, and the original one I wrote took me like a day to write it, and the alternate one took about 5 minutes to write.
Let me just say to start with, I think the man is a genius. I think he's done the greatest scores, who I admire. But I also feel he's very stubborn, like I am myself, I think. And when it came to Alien, I temped the film myself with as much Jerry Goldsmith music as I could, because I knew he was going to do the film.
He's an absolute master of like doing a a rough temporary soundtrack, etc. He's just got this great eye and ear, and he says, I know what piece of music would be great in there. And so he always put the most, which is a real problem sometimes, because you have this free range of, you can choose any you want.
And whenever I do these temps myself, I obviously know by that time who's going to be the composer, and I bend over backwards to find stuff that they've done in various other films to see if I can make it work. Obviously you can't always make it work, so you have to use material from other sources. But I just think it's invaluable. And I must say, at times there's areas you can get to work better than they do later, and that's not degrading anything composers do. But I don't think anybody is closer to the film than the director and the editor will ever be. I mean, we live with this, it's ours. And the thing is, when you're trying to create a temp score, and if you're interested in music, which I love, it's a love of mine, then you know the mood you want to create, you know what you want to try and say musically. And I don't think you should try and influence the composers too much, but if you get a mood correct, that's the mood I feel they should go with. They can change the theme, change the orchestration, but keep in mind the mood that we created.
I remember when the pods opened, from the hypersleep, they did eventually temp track it, and in that particular scene they had temp tracked it with a piece of music I had written for Freud. And everyone thought that, oh, look how wonderful that music works. I said, it stinks, it's all wrong. I mean, it was sort of a little lullaby that I had written for Freud. So I wrote a piece. I wrote a piece for that, and it was very impressionistic and very mysterious, but pretty, but mysterious, and I thought it worked brilliantly.
That thing's gonna eat through the goddamn hall. Come on, what's going on?
The film came out with the Freud music in it. Consequently, I got this more letters saying, "Starting to repeat yourself, eh?" They had bought the music from Freud and put it in that spot. So you could see that I was sort of like going at opposite ends of the pole with the filmmakers on the picture.
And I don't think he ever forgave me for using like Howard Hanson for the end of the film, and keeping the music that he wrote for Freud for the film. Though that was Fox's decision. You know, they could have said we're using the music that's written, but I do think that what we did on our temp in those areas was better than what he did. And I'm taking nothing away from the rest of the film because what he did was perfect for it.
Well, you know, this is always a tricky part because, you know, finally, no matter how much of it the composer hums for you or plays on the piano or does anything like that, you know, you don't really hear his score until you're on this, you know, recording stage. Or at least that was the way it used to be. And his score, when it finally was way too lush and way too, more like his Patton score, you know, and which was not really what anybody particularly wanted. We wanted it more haunting and weird and strange, and it wasn't really any of that. So actually what happened was we bought a couple of the Goldsmith pieces that we had in the temp, and then in the dub, in the mix, you know, we really played down a lot of his stuff and played up some kind of weird sounds that we had and all the rest of that stuff. This is really Ridley. When I say us here, I really mean Ridley. And, you know, and he did an amazing job in the dub. But Mr. Goldsmith was quite unhappy when he saw the movie. And in fact, went to the studio. He'd done a lot of movies for Fox and, you know, announced that we were going to be a disaster and it was horrible and we'd ruined his score and we'd done all the rest of that stuff.
They released it as an album, and I bought the album. And there were a couple of tracks on the album that weren't in the movie. And they were tracks in which Goldsmith used horns to personify the alien. And it was very effective, this creepy, distant honking that comes in that is clearly meant to be the alien's theme. And it's very effective. It's not in the movie. But then I can't really see any place in the movie that you could use it without it being intrusive.
Ridley is a brilliant filmmaker. He's a brilliant visualist, and I think that was just his second film, and he wasn't as articulate then about what the music should do. I think he thinks so much in visuals, and music cannot replicate the visuals. It's not what it's supposed to do. And I think he was thinking more in terms, at least the message I was getting for him is he wanted me to be visual with the music. Well, I can't be visual with the music. That's not what I'm supposed to do. Let the director and the cinematographer put the visuals on the screen. Let me do the emotional element. And I think that's where it became a big problem with me. And fortunately, I had a lot of time to do it, and I went back and redid music, and somehow it all worked out finally in the end. But there was a problem. And I think the biggest problem was just in communication between me and the director. It would be interesting if that film had been made today and Ridley had now the benefit of having made so many other pictures and worked with a lot of different composers, how he would have approached it, you know, with me musically. The real challenge of composing music for films is to write a score that works brilliantly in the film and also has a life of its own that stands by itself. I think many of the great scores of the past work brilliantly in a film, but taken by themselves, they don't stand alone.